Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis Shinglebecker, and I am a director here at Aperio Philanthropy. Aperio is a nonprofit consulting firm with a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive change by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate the revenue for nonprofit missions. Our client services provide strategic advisory, hands-on support, and embedded fundraisers to organizations nationwide. We are excited to host a three-part series this summer as follow-up to our series last year, the Relationship-Based Fundraising Toolbox, where we will be going back to the basics of relationship-based fundraising. Today's webinar will focus on the fundamentals of organizing your list. As questions come up, please submit them via the Q&A tool, and they will be addressed at the end of today's session. We are also recording today's session and will be sharing that out with folks as follow-up to today's call by the end of the week. It is now my pleasure to kick it over to our facilitators, Kelly Bronig and Bree McKee.
Thank you, Travis. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be welcoming you all to our first session of this summer series. Today, we're going to be focusing on organizing your donor list. Summer is really the season of organization for development teams. It's when we're all stepping away from our busy day-to-day in order to prepare for the year ahead. We believe that your mission, your donors, and your team have much more potential, and we're here with you all to make it simple for you to realize that potential. As you're going to hear today, we're really passionate about going beyond great ideas. We know that the challenge is less often what to do, but rather how to get it done amongst all of the competing priorities that everyone has on their plate. Since Aperio Philanthropy was created, we've been listening, learning, and distilling what works into a clear roadmap that any nonprofit is able to follow. The building blocks of that roadmap are, as you see here on this slide, people, a clear business model, and ensuring that there's a culture of philanthropy. Aperio works alongside organizations large and small to implement this roadmap and unlock new fundraising potential. My name is Kelly Bronig. I work with Aperio as a senior advisor. I've spent my career leading strategy in the fundraising or development operations space for many nonprofit organizations across the country. I am especially passionate about helping organizations level up their operations and implementing efficiencies to create that solid foundation that development teams really need to better serve their missions. I have the honor of being here today with my colleague, Bree McKee. Bree, I'll kick it to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bree McKee. As Kelly articulated, I'm a director here at Aperio, and I've spent the last 20 years working in the nonprofit sector in the last decade in fundraising specifically. And I'm really passionate about helping organizations strategically connect with their donors to really make those authentic relationships that we know are so important. Those relationships coming to life in support of their mission. And I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Okay, so today we're going to focus on organizing our lists. The question that we're really asking ourselves in this exercise is, who should hear our case for support? We're going to walk through how to approach segmentation, how to identify high potential donors, how to prioritize those high potential donors, and then finally, how to segment everyone else. Before we jump into that, I just want to reiterate for people who have now joined a few housekeeping items. You may notice that we are recording this session. We will turn off the recording when we get to the Q&A section. And right now, feel free to start dropping your questions into the Q&A tool so you don't forget them, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So let's start with the big picture here. How are we approaching segmentation? We want to ask ourselves, why do we even need to do segmentation? You may already have organized lists or a way that you all are approaching your donors. Really, what we want to call out is that your database has more potential. You may have heard from some donors that they're not currently in a financial position to give, or they're focusing on other causes right now. And while there are others who are looking for more ways to get involved, they just don't know about your opportunities yet. And as we shift to relationship-based fundraising overall, what we're going to see is that the additional potential has been there the entire time. In my career, every single database that I've encountered, and I have encountered quite a few, every single one has held at least 2 to 3 years of untouched dynamic revenue growth just from thinking about and approaching your supporters in new ways. So when we are talking to boards and new clients, most often what we're hearing is our database is stale. We need to acquire new donors. And while that might be true for some organizations, in our experience, the real need is to make investments in acquisition more effective than is currently happening. Most organizations' acquisition channels are narrowed down to direct mail, special events, peer-to-peer, and DIY. And what you'll notice about these is that with the exception of the do-it-yourself approach, these are the most expensive fundraising channels. The cost to raise a new dollar is typically 40 to 60 cents when you factor in staff time. Those are very expensive dollars. Unfortunately, then we get so focused on the next mail piece or the next event or the next fundraiser that we end up overlooking the ways to bring the donors we have already acquired into the family in meaningful and sustainable ways. The stats that you see here show us that on average, nonprofits are retaining about 45% of donors year over year. That means we make our case to existing supporters in a way that inspires 45% of donors to end up renewing their gift. The flip side of that means that 55% of donors do not renew. If your organization does not yet have a middle or major giving program, your retention rate is likely much lower than the stats that you're seeing here. Clearly, retention will not ever be 100%. But every percentage point increase represents significant revenue, and additionally, a reduction in the cost to raise a dollar because retention is less expensive than acquisition. In case you're not yet worried about this, here is another stat for you. Pursuant has created a donor loyalty benchmarking study. They dug into the data of over 20 organizations and found that 62% of the donors in their database had only given one gift in their lifetime. 62% of the donors had given one gift in their lifetime of being a donor. The question we always ask organizations that are hot on acquisition is, what are you acquiring them for? If you're not willing to invest in the systems and people to engage, inspire, and ask donors for renewals, then it's hard to say that there's a point in acquiring donors at all. The profit on a first gift is minimal or even negative in some channels. The real value of a donor comes in their lifetime of giving, the entirety of it. For these organizations, the average lifetime giving of donors who were retained was over $1,000. If 30 of those donors had remained engaged, that would be 30,000 more for the mission. If it was 300 donors that remained engaged, 300,000. If it was 3,000, 3 million, and so on. A donor that we are not engaging is not revenue lost once. It is revenue lost for a lifetime. And so you may be asking yourself, well, what does it take to renew a donor? I'm talking so much about this. So in order to stay engaged, they don't need fancy technology. They don't need big events. What they need is you. They need you and they need your team. They need you to do all the things that we all know to do. We'll start with providing timely acknowledgments, meaning within a week of their gift at most. They need updates throughout the year about how their gift is making an impact. They want to know the ways to get more involved and excited and inspired by your mission. They want to know, are there opportunities to meet other donors? That can be where your events come in, but they don't need to be big productions. They need to be interactive so that your donors can communicate. They also need opportunities to meet with you, both in groups and in one-on-one scenarios. They need you. You might be thinking to yourself, this all sounds great, but there are so many donors and there's only one of me or a few of us on the team at your organization. How are we supposed to provide all of this for everyone? I will tell you. This is where segmentation enters the conversation. Segmentation really is a fancy word for organizing your list, which again is why we're here today. It means grouping your current and prospective donors into a handful of lists. That way you can create plans and experiences for groups of donors specifically. And these experiences will be efficient to plan, but will feel robust to the donor. So it's going to be simple on the back end for you and your teams to get segmentation down, but the impact on your donor base will be tenfold the investment that you've made to do the segmentation. Your personalized moves management will layer on top of this, but can be much more focused since you've already created a great experience for your donors. One shared segmentation strategy for the whole organization, not just specific portfolios. We want to make sure that there are clear engagement frameworks for each segment. There are clear roles and responsibilities and clear processing for moving donors between segments. And you can see on the slide, we have that broken down specifically. We're looking at portfolio donors, middle donors, general donors, and what are the roles and responsibilities for each of those as we're segmenting our donors into their specific buckets. From your organization's perspective, an organized list combined with an engagement plan, which we'll discuss at the next session in 2 weeks, will ensure that no donor falls through the cracks, that all donors are treated well, but not equally. And what we mean by that is that you are creating special opportunities for donors as they grow in their impact on your mission. So treating them well, but not equally. And then finally, that everyone internally knows their role at your organization and they play that role. So engagement is simple, it's seamless, it's not a confusing hassle to get each mailing out, and I know we can all relate to that, or have each cultivation event planned. More importantly, at all times, by doing this, your donor will feel that their gift was used well and in the way that they intended, that their partnership makes a difference, and that really most importantly here, they have a role in the future of this mission. Okay. If that hasn't felt detailed enough, now we are going to really dive into the details. Here is the process that we're going to walk through with you all today. First, we're going to talk through choosing what your segments are, and then identifying your high potential donors, prioritizing those high potential donors, segmenting everybody else who falls outside of those 2 buckets, tag your segments in your database, and then assign owners for each of the steps, and finally make your plan. One note before we get started, for simplicity's sake, as we walk through this today, we're going to focus on individuals. To include companies and foundations, you will do largely the same process, but figuring out your high potential donors will require a bit more research. And if you have mostly institutional donors, follow along to get the general logic of what we're discussing here today, and then schedule a session with us to talk through how to make that process simple for you, your team, your organization. Okay, step 1, choosing your segments. In this step, we're going to be asking, who are you trying to reach and who needs special treatment. So we like to start this process by taking a look at your database overall. We start with fresh eyes, review the data that you have in there. We're going to look at things like the number of records that you have, the number of donors who've given in the past 3 years, the number of 1,000 plus donors in the past 3 years. Similarly, the number of 10,000 plus donors in the past 3 years. You can hear past 3 years is kind of where our sweet spot is. What is your average gift size overall? And then finally, what is your retention rate? All of these stats help us understand what the starting point really is. You can skip this step if you don't have a way to get the data, but we highly recommend it. And we'll talk through a little bit of what does it look like if we don't have a formal database. You still have data of some kind for us to run these statistics on the information. We can also produce a report for you with all of the key information that you'll need and for this exercise, and also to make data-driven decisions about what your fundraising strategy should really be. So when we segment donors, there are a lot of factors that we can consider. We have a few examples here. We have recency, and by that we mean when was their last gift? How long have they been giving? We have frequency. How often are they giving? How many gifts have they given in their lifetime? We have type. What type of gifts do they make? Are they giving primarily to events? Are they doing peer-to-peer? Or are they just giving directly to the mission? Then, of course, there's amount. How much are they giving? How much was their first gift, their last gift, and their largest gift? Those are also statistics that we like to follow very closely. We have potential. What is their estimated giving capacity? What are they giving to other organizations? And in general, how philanthropic are they? We also have motivation. This is what drives their giving specifically to you and your organization's mission. And then finally, interests. What interests them in our mission? What are their interests generally? So there are many ways to approach segmentation. The first is just using giving data. We recommend starting with the second, which is using your giving data plus some sort of wealth screening tool. So this will give us an understanding of capacity to give. This is the method that we're going to walk through with you today. If you don't have access to a wealth screening tool, contact us. We can talk through it. We can screen your records for you. And if you are used to segmentation and have an established stewardship program and digital programs already, you can shift right away to dynamic segmentation. And what that really means is that rather than grouping donors into the same segment all of the time, you are continually segmenting for the exact audience that you need, which will allow you to provide highly personalized donor experiences. And Pursuant's Giving DNA, which you can see is on the slide right here, their platform is our recommendation for advanced segmentation.
All right, thanks, Kelly, for walking us through those key steps. I'm going to take it over now and spend a little bit of time, now that you know about some of the tools that are available, we are going to dig into now how we identify those high potential donors. Why, you may ask, do we want to start with high potential donors? And the reason is here, as you can see on the slide, the 80-20 rule. In general, and in most things we do, but particularly in fundraising, 20% of the work is responsible for or drives 80% of the results. 20% of the donors are typically giving 80% of the revenue. So we should be spending 80% of our time and investment on that 20% of donors. And that's why high potentials are our first segment to identify, and why we'll spend the most of our time here today talking about this group. When we are identifying our high potential donors, we are asking ourselves two questions. Who are the 20% of donors to focus on? And where are their biggest growth opportunities? So the high potential donors we identify are going to require super special treatment. And so we are only going to identify as many as we can manage effectively. we'll ask ourselves, how many donors are we looking for? And in answering that question, here are some standard best practice recommendations based upon your staffing structure or your capacity. So typically we see a full-time major gifts officer, major gifts fundraiser interacting with 150 donors on their portfolio. Institutional giving officers are going to have anywhere between 75 and 100, depending upon the requirements involved with reporting or the intensity of the institutional donors, grant applications and things that are involved with that as well. Many organizations may not have the luxury of having full-time dedicated major gift officers or institutional giving fundraisers, and many are managing portfolios in a blended capacity, in a blended role, and have other non-frontline fundraising responsibilities like managing a team or managing others. In those circumstances and situations, we would see anywhere between 25 and 50 donors per blended role. And then you can see really clearly here for your chief executive officer or executive director, as well as your chief development officer or VP of fundraising, anywhere between 10 to 20 donors on the portfolio. Next, we're going to be asking, who exactly are we looking for? And there's really two ways to be thinking about this as well. Most organizations, and this is understandable, focus on past giving as their biggest indicator that someone should be prioritized for this special treatment that we've talked about. And this is certainly a good place to start, as past giving is a strong indicator. We want to encourage you, though, to also be thinking about and recommend focusing on capacity or future potential, not just what they've given in the past. For most donors in our database, there is a big gap between their current giving level, what they've currently given, and their real capacity. And the gap is your growth opportunity and your best growth opportunity. So when we are creating the short list of high potential donors, we don't just want to focus on people who are already giving at their highest level. We really want to focus in on the people who have the biggest gap or the largest amount of room to grow. For major gifts, as well as for foundations and companies, but for major gifts specifically, we are really talking then, our definition of a strong prospect is this capacity plus approach. That means that capacity is the non-negotiable. Whether we see the donor's capacity in a wealth screening, or we know based upon their giving to other organizations, perhaps their net worth or other indicators, we have some reason to believe that that person or that organization has the ability to make a large gift. The plus piece means that capacity is not enough. Just because someone has money doesn't necessarily mean they want to give it away. And just because someone does choose to give funds away, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give it to your particular mission. So our process is really to be able to determine and create a short list based upon capacity, and then to choose from that list the people with the most plus indicators. So here are some examples of what we mean by plus and what plus can look like. It could mean that they've made a first-time gift of $250 or more. It could also mean that you know they have a philanthropic orientation. You've seen them not only give to your organization, but they're involved in other missions in your community as well. That they gave recently. They are responsive, perhaps when you send your thank you note or make your thank you call within a week of receiving that gift, as we talked about earlier in the deck today. They're picking up the phone and they're engaging with you, and they're sharing with you why they chose to support your mission. So they're wanting to engage. They're demonstrating that they have an interest in the organization. And similarly, expressed interest, outright giving, mission connection. They may have a personal story or personal connection to their family or someone that means something to them that is connected to the work that your organization is doing. All of these are really strong examples of what plus can look like in addition to their past giving. Of course, volunteers are a key aspect as well. Someone who is choosing to give of their time in addition to their treasure is certainly a group to consider as you think about that plus capacity as well. So in summary, as you think about who should go into a major gifts portfolio, the people or institutions that we should be prioritizing are, again, those with high capacity. And on here on the slide, we recommend starting with that estimated annual giving capacity of $100,000 or more. Verifying that capacity for each person through conversations and additional research. So getting to know those donors. Again, those who show interest in your mission based upon the bullets underneath that in the slide, based upon their giving, and then other information you may be able to glean as you're getting to know them. And then also by ideally giving to you and to your mission beyond just events. Okay, so now we're going to get into, because we know how many donors we're looking for and what we're looking for, we're going to get into some specifics about how you might start to pull a list to review and to start working from. So as you can see on this slide, you can see an export or example of an export that you could do from your database and the kinds of fields that we want to pull that allow us to explore gift recency, frequency, monetary value or amount. And as Kelly mentioned, if you have a wealth screening tool and wealth screening information already in your database, pull that into this list as well. And if not, export the rest of these fields, and then we can get to that wealth screening piece by a research vendor, or that's something that Aperio could certainly help with as well. Only people with addresses on file, this is really important, can be wealth screened. So really want to ensure you're focusing on those folks for whom you have a quality address. But don't remove any high dollar value donors without addresses from the list. Those are important folks to pay attention to. If you have a large list and you need to make it more manageable, you can filter out people with a first gift under $250 or $100 if you're a relatively new or startup organization. And you can filter out people who have not given in the past 3 years. And then from here, we can use Excel filters and sorting to start whittling down the list to the size that we want and the size that is manageable. And again, capacity, as we've previously mentioned, is the non-negotiable part. So we're going to start with capacity to narrow down your list. And you're going to first look at your wealth screening results. Here you can see the rankings that several screening tools use called gift capacity range. And these are rankings for 5-year gifts. So we have done the math here for you to break down what a 5-year giving capacity would look like on a 1-year basis. Now we're going to select the categories that we're interested in. And we recommend you making your cutoff a bit higher than your major gift level. And we recommend this for 2 reasons. One, your wealth screening tools, while they are full of a wealth of information, they are also a bit optimistic about what people are willing to give and to give away. And it's rare that your organization is going to be the donor's only organization that they support. And so you'll want to be considering that when you look at their gift capacity. So for example, if your major gifts level is $10,000, we would encourage you to look at people in the capacity range of $20,000 per year per category. Now we're going to have you look at how many you have left. So compare the list, the goal list, to the size you came up with. So for example, if you have 1 fundraiser and 1 executive director, we would be looking for 170 high potential donors. 150 would be assigned to the frontline fundraiser and 20 would be assigned to the executive director. And then once you do the capacity step, there may be 350 names on the list to consider, which obviously means we need to focus and whittle that down. In order to do so, if you need a more focused list, again, this point, your list is going to be a little bit bigger than what you're looking for. And so some ways to whittle the list further down is to exclude another capacity category. And you could start also isolating people with the most plus factors, such as people whose first, or last gifts are not event related, because we all know that gifts given directly to our missions have a higher probability of renewing, or people with the highest number of lifetime gifts. And again, you can do this using filters, or if you know your donors well enough, you can do this through a manual review. If you have fewer donors than you are looking for, we would then consider adding a capacity level back in, so you have a more robust list to work from. Then, as you think about finalizing your list, to identify the high potential donors, we recommend creating an extra column in the worksheet and putting an X next to the names you want to flag as high potential. That will help when filtering and when you're working to make that list bigger or smaller. Once you've arrived at the list that you want, you can then cut and paste those high potential donors into a separate tab or a separate workbook so that they don't get mixed up with the rest of the list for the next steps. At this point, you can also add the name of the staff person who will be responsible for this donor as the relationship manager. So for example, if my executive director is going to manage a list of 20 donors, they should be listed as the relationship manager next to those 20 names. One thing though we want you to note is that while that executive director is listed as the relationship manager, that does not mean that he or she is necessarily the only person who is doing all of the relationship building or interacting with the donor. So we would encourage you to be thinking about the relationship manager as the quarterback, or the person who is in charge really of the strategy and the experience for that donor, which can include involving teammates, such as others on the program side of your organization, or others who might help deepen their connection to the mission in the process of getting to know them. Okay, now we are going to talk about how you prioritize these high potential donors now that we've talked about whittling down your list. When we are prioritizing our high potential donors, we are essentially asking two questions. For the list I'm responsible for, or for which I am the relationship manager, who are the 20% of the donors that I should be focused on? Again, that 80-20 rule. And how will I manage the whole list? This is where tiering your list comes in. Tiering is really a wonderful time management tool, as it helps us understand and know how to engage with donors based on their current giving and their capacity. There's certainly more than one way to approach this, but we recommend focusing not only on people we currently know well or who are currently big donors, but also those people, again, with the most potential. And as you can see in our illustration here, we use 3 tiers. The top tier is the smallest and the bottom tier is the biggest. When we think about our tiers, we define tier 1 as your top 20 donors in terms of growth potential over the next 12 to 18 months. So these are the people with the biggest gap between their current giving level and their potential, if you recall the visual from a few slides back. Again, often these are current major donors with even greater potential, and sometimes it's someone whose multi-year pledge is ending that we want to approach for a renewal or an upgrade. Sometimes it could be someone who's only given to us once or at a lower level, but we know the capacity and the plus signs are there. Again, those are that mission connection. They're majorly involved in other philanthropic endeavors or missions elsewhere in the community. They have a deep interest in our work. Perhaps they're volunteering with us on a regular basis. They've shown willingness to take a meeting, etc. All of those are, again, opportunities and indicators for that capacity plus sign. For our tier 2, we define these folks as established donors who are likely to give again in the next 12 months. These are your recurring major or even close to major donors. and people who may be paying off multi-year pledges. You could also include board members in this tier as well. And then lastly, we have our tier 3, which is essentially going to be everyone else that you're going to be getting to know over the next year, the next 12 months. You might know some of these people personally, but maybe you don't know a lot of details about their philanthropy and what they value. Others in tier 3 may be new names. Perhaps they've given recently to the organization. And so these are folks that are ripe to get to know and to understand their connection to your mission. Either way, by including them on your list and ensuring that they're in tier 3, you're really setting the intention to spend time with them this year in the hopes that strategically and intentionally moving them and getting to know them will move them up to tier 1 or tier 2. So in other words, tier 1 is your top source of growth for this year. Tier 2 is your source of retained donors and upgrades. And then tier 3 is your top source of newly engaged or re-engaged donors to build your pipeline. We have put the highest potential in the short to medium term in the top tiers. And that means the top tiers is where we will put our highest focus according to our 80-20 rule. And that high focus means a highly personalized experience. Again, we want to give an excellent experience to everyone who's interacting with our organization, but we're going to spend the most time, again, a time management tool, so we're going to be spending the most time working with the top tier donors individually. In terms of how to do the tiering, you have 2 options. The first is manually doing this literally one donor at a time. And most use this approach because it really allows you to build on your existing knowledge of the donor and the relationship and to really be thinking about them on a one-on-one basis. However, there is an alternative approach which you can use, which is really just a batching process and then reviewing each individual donor manually. This is the process, the second process, the batching, that we would recommend for small shops or for situations where you really just want to start tiering quickly, which mostly involves a lot of filtering and sorting in Excel. You can look at capacity and giving history, including, again, that gift amount, gift recency, gift frequency, to make decisions about how to prioritize donors. So we have gone through choosing your segments and how to identify these high potential donors that are going to be prioritized. Now we're going to chat about how you segment everyone else and then what next steps are associated with those segments. Again, core segments are based on donor potential and relationship management strategy. So you'll see here in your major gifts portfolio, the folks we just went through, the tier 1s, 2s, and 3s, those other related accounts and key relationships. Everyone else is going to go into the middle donors, which we also recommend tiering. Your tier A are those folks that have major gifts potential and are a priority to focus on one-to-one and one-to-few touch points. And then tier B are those other existing middle donors or high capacity donors. And then everyone else here will land in your general donors. So every donor in your database belongs to exactly one of these core segments: major gifts, middle, or general. Then you will see over on the right-hand side of the slide, there are also donors that may belong into special groups, such as your board members, past and current, program alumni or volunteers, event supporters, and the other list you can read for yourself as well. Our middle donors can be where you place major donors or individuals with capacity if there's no room for them anywhere else in the portfolios. It's also where anyone with lower capacity or people currently giving at a mid-level should be assigned. So depending upon the size of your database, you might be looking at a middle donor segment of a few hundred to even a few thousand donors. Sustainers, these are your monthly donors, and your recurring annual donors really get their own segment so that we can provide an elevated experience to this group of donors through one-to-many management. And then your general donors really is everybody else. They get their own segment so that we can ensure they're receiving really the baseline experience through one-to-many touch points. And really, we would be segmenting those by their last gift date. Of course, keeping in mind the Libunts and Sibunts who might be receiving a little bit more targeted communication based upon their lapsed time frame. So to recap, Kelly went through steps 1, 2, and 3, choosing our segments, or excuse me, I went through choosing your segments, identifying your high potential donors, prioritizing those high potential donors, how we've segmented everyone else. And then just to recap for number 5, tagging those segments in your database, major, middle, and general donors, and then really using that to track your donor experience by segment. And there's more to come on this in the next 2 weeks for our next series. So we'd love for you to participate in that to learn more about that. So you are understanding and know who receives what treatment. And then 6 is really just assigning those owners, ensuring every person in a portfolio is connected to a relationship manager within the organization. And then we really recommend at least one next step is planned for everyone on your portfolio, and then up to the next 3 steps are planned for those top tier 1 donors.
Perfect. And just to wrap up a few quick key takeaways of everything that we covered today. Segmentation is ultimately organizing your organization's list into a stable, manageable number of groups that your team can handle based on current giving and engagement, along with future potential of these donors and prospects. You're focusing on people with high capacity who are engaged with your mission and ideally are giving beyond events. And then finally, using those middle giving and general donor segments to ensure that absolutely no donor is falling through the cracks.